Jake McCandless, spiritual prepper, tapping into overlooked prophecies to prepare for your doomsday. I love this. Religious liberty is under attack. Immorality is the standard. Christians are being persecuted. The church is struggling because it's getting solutions from all the wrong places. Look at this new pope. He's a disaster. We shouldn't be surprised about current conditions, but we are, as the world appears, spiraling out of control. Spiritual prepper helps you focus your spirituality, your morality, and your faith in these troubled times. Spiritual prepper provides a fresh perspective on end-of-time prophecy by drawing out the spiritual effects of natural disasters, the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, topics like the spiritual implication of identifying with Christianity. I mean, I'm a Catholic. I'm probably part of the problem, right? Jake is the executive director of Prophecy Simplified. Prophecy Simplified seeks to help local churches bridge the gap by making biblical prophecy simple and real. The book is Spiritual Prepper, tapping into overlooked prophecies to prepare you for doomsday. This is available on WNDBooks.com. The book will actually be published in April. Jake is with us right now. Hey, Jake, welcome to the Ed Tyll Show on Starcom Radio Network.
Well, hey, Ed, thanks for having me on the show, and you've had quite the jam-packed show.
I'm telling you, man. Now, here, we'll just go from the get, all right? I'm Catholic. So I heard a lot about this stuff when I was a kid. But they did tell us Revelations was not meant to be taken literally, and they would not say for absolute certain there's an end of times. Now, fundamentalist Christian groups do say this. Where's your theology on this? Are you a full believer that one day, boom, this is over and it ends badly?
Definitely. And, going back to what you said, how you were taught originally, and even going back to your last segment on angels, the debate of which is truth. Is it to be taken literally, or is it meant to be taken just spiritually? It all goes back to how we interpret the Bible. And so my question begins with, what is the reason biblically that someone would take it symbolically? There's no direct statement within the scriptures that say this is symbolic. I mean, obviously parts of it is.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's going to be the jump-off point. There's going to be somebody, even when we were in school at a young age, 4th, 5th grade, there's always somebody who's going to say, did that really happen? And once we say to them, well, obviously that one is symbolic, Timmy, then you put the whole work under suspicion, because as you say, there is nothing in the Bible that says, by the way, the story you're about to hear actually happened exactly this way. We even have conflicting passages among Gospels, not that they knock each other out, but one would say it a certain way and maybe put it in a location or a time of the year or a sequence where the other is different. So go ahead, navigate that for me. What's the shorthand for the public? When you're looking at the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament side by side, what is a good guideline for what is literal and what is symbolic?
Yeah, I think really the starting point for me has to be making the scripture authoritative to your life and to the understanding of this world. It's easy to, look at it and just so many times just pull what you want like a buffet. But we're to take the whole thing. And so, if you believe that in angels and you believe what the scripture says about Michael, if you believe what it says about marriage, what it says about divorce, those things, what it says about Jesus, what it says about salvation, we also have to take the rest of it. And so but really far as a guideline on how to interpret that, I think you start with a basic reading, and then as you go through the Old Testament, you can look back at how Israel and how the Jews in that day looked at the Old Testament, and they took the prophecies there as literal. Some of them were transpiring before their eyes, and they took them very literal, and so they looked ahead to the future. And it's only in later centuries do rabbis pick up the symbolic aspect of it. And so you need to carry that on into the New Testament. And really, unless the Scriptures say itself that this is symbolic or obvious, in Revelation you find numbers, the number 666 that comes up, that's obviously symbolic. But the message before that and in that text is very literal.
Well, it's interesting that you were listening a previous segment, so let's tie it in a little bit. What do you think happened on that day when Lucifer goes to the basement, Michael's up top, Adam and Eve, snake, apple, the Cain and Abel story? You're taking that as absolutely that happened. There was a Garden of Eden. There were two humans, fully developed, no evolution necessary. They came into being. One's made out of the rib of the other. They're talking in verbal terms to their creator, so it means they're imbued with language. And they're also scamming their creator, who they're convinced created everything. So that is a tough one unless someone can source it for you. I took that to mean a symbolism as a kid. They're showing you that human beings can be ungrateful to the point of turning on. In other words, that was the lesson we got. We'll disobey anybody. Even if it's God talking straight to our face, we'll lie to him because basically...
Which is true.
We just want what we want. We don't care who created us. We don't care about heaven. We want what we want. Sex, food, shelter, acquisition. But you heard her. I had some issues with this. That an angel's going to help you get a 7-bedroom house. What kind of angel is that? He should be in hell if he's doing that. God's not here to make sure you have a nice house. God's here to make sure you got shelter. So what I'm asking is, if you do take a lot of this literally, it's difficult to find the way to demonstrate it, but certainly the message of narcissism, I'm the most important thing, even the creator of the world doesn't mean anything to me right now when I want something. Or, I know that's my brother, my mother gave birth to him, but he pissed me off, so we turned around, I clocked him right over the head, and he's dead. And there's only four humans on planet Earth, and I killed one of them while we still talk to the creator. These are going to be hard to demonstrate, but symbolically, I thought they were solid. Where do you find, when you see something in the Bible that you take literally, what are usually the signals that you find there in that passage or chapter where you go, this is literal, and I can tell because of A, B, and C? How does that work for you?
Well, as going through and starting in the context of Genesis, where you're talking about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, it begins with Moses. He tells throughout the first 5 books there in Scripture that this is the word of the Lord, that the Lord gave him this word. And so, throughout the rest of his writings, he's writing the actual history. And so there's no reason to look at it symbolically. And so I think the starting point has to be literal unless otherwise told, or in the Psalms and the Proverbs and places where it's more poetry. Obviously, there's symbolism. But I think the starting point, the default is literal. There's no reason for it not to be.
Okay.
And really, if you go throughout history, that's the way it has been understood until later on when it began to be allegorized and looked at in just a spiritual aspect.
No, I hear you, and I appreciate that. I think that's true. I guess the thing that people want to understand, and the world in which we live makes it more difficult, I think, than when I was a kid to understand, is what are the end of times prophecies telling us? And you, I know, are tapped into, by virtue of the title of the book there, overlooked prophecies. Can you go over some of the overlooked and what you believe these prophecies are telling us about the end of times?
Yeah, I think we have laid before us the events that are going to happen. And really just the overall aspect of the flow of the world. In the book of Daniel, chapter 2, we're given this image, a statue, and God explains it to Daniel through a dream, and it lays out the empires that are going to come. And then we know we've worked through most of those. And throughout the second largest prolific prophecy in Scripture is that the Jews would return home, and that's happened before our eyes. And then we'll just, as you go through Revelation, it just walks through the events that are going to happen. Some are, and one of the things I've learned throughout this ministry I do, you mentioned Prophecy Simplified, as I travel and speak to churches, so many prophecy teachers have made it so mysterious. I almost think it's almost for job security, that they're here to unlock the mysteries. And it doesn't have to be that big of a mystery. There are mysteries, but it's very plain. But what I'm focusing on in the book is especially 6 verses that can be considered prophecy that don't necessarily talk about the political end of it or the battles and war or things in the heavens. It's talking about very practical living aspects and really tells us how we're going to be morally, ethically, and in terms of our spirituality at the end of the age. And so either we're there at that point, or at least this is the trajectory we're on. It's almost as I think of Marty McFly in Back to the Future, as he goes back in time, he has a picture of the future, and he knows exactly how things are going to end up. And I believe that's what we have in these passages.
Well, if you were sharing one of your favorite turn of phrases in the prophecies, and you, first on your favorite, the second one, the most overlooked prophecy, what would you turn to? What two would you share with us?
Well, the one that's driving this book and driving my ministry, I have been a pastor for the past 12 years, church I absolutely loved, and I began writing this book, and in Matthew 24, the disciples, Jesus' disciples, are sitting with him. They're on the Mount of Olives, and they ask him the question personally, what are the signs of your return? And he gives an answer. Wouldn't that be awesome just to sit with Jesus and him explain what's going to happen? He walks down the steps of what it's going to be like. And in the midst of all that, that's where we get the wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, false teachers, false messiahs, and persecution of the Christians. And in that, he says in verse 10, Matthew 24:10, he says, at that time, many will turn away from the faith. He goes on to say, will betray and hate each other. Is this really the driving point for me, is that as I begin to look at my congregation, my question was, had I prepared them enough? Because the picture we have of the future is that professed Christians would turn away from the faith. And the word turn away here in the original language, in the Greek behind it, it's not necessarily just an abandonment or a turn to atheism. It's more just a stumble. You just, as we all do, we all stumble, but it's a stumble and not returning back to that faithfulness. And I think, one of the things that I try to get across in the book and in my speaking is that if we follow Scripture and we believe into heaven and we believe Jesus is returning and we're going to see him face to face, our faithfulness is going to matter to us. Right now we're just happy to get to heaven by the skin of our teeth maybe, but our faithfulness is going to matter. And so that's what I try to get across, is your faithfulness matters, but it's going to be challenged, and we are all susceptible of turning away.
All right, because I'm looking at 24. I was trying to digest it while you were talking about it. So what do you feel in Matthew 24 is the most powerful phrase? I mean, literally, as it is on that page. What is it that you think, man, that's the one, right? You can tell right there. There's no denying that. What's the undeniable part of 20? Because 24 is a long passage here. So what do you think? What's the kernel there? What is the real central point? And what phrase are you looking at there? Because I'm very interested in this.
Beginning in verse 3, you have that question. And really through verses 4 down to verse 13, you have the immediate, just step-by-step events that are going to happen. But there are also events that were happening right then. Mm-hmm. And Jesus calls these birth pains. And my 2 children was born by C-section, which is a guy I think is a great deal. You just show up and they do the thing, and that's it. But my sister went through a whole day of labor, and we would go in her room and try to keep her spirits up. And I'd watch the seismograph, for lack of better terms, that shows the contractions.
Right.
And it's waves that are going up and down.
Right.
You have the intensity, and as you get closer to the birth, they get closer together and they get more intense. And what this Jesus tells us is the birth pains in verse 8. He says these things are just the start of the end. And so what you have, there's things that always happen. That's always a challenge to everybody in life, and also as Christians.
But I just want to say there, the end of the age is a phrase of a disciple. I don't really see Jesus saying that things are all going to end. Now, he does say that you guys are going to be persecuted and put to death. But that happens contemporary with the Roman Empire. So where do you see language where Jesus says the end will come? That's what I'm looking. I'm looking for something simple the audience can hook onto. That for sure, we're not, in other words, as we discussed before, lots of metaphor and symbolism in the Bible. So you could take Matthew 24 as Jesus is talking in the abstract. Do you see evidence that he's talking as a concrete end? I mean, like the oceans will disappear, the mountains will come tumbling down, the sky will fall, and the universe, as you know it, will no longer. You know what I mean? Does he state that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
As you said, the end of the age is the disciples' words. So that doesn't mean they were correct in what they said, because most of the time in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're not correct in what the disciples say at that point. But if you back up, they also said the sign of your coming, and then that's Jesus is talking about and goes further on in the text and talks about his actual return, as you see in verse 30, as he talks about actually returning. And then we know in Revelation he talks about an actual return.
Well, look, but he does say, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. I mean, that could be symbolic. We don't know that there's going to be an actual thing in the sky, but you certainly could see him in the sky. So that's an excellent example. Where do you ground that? Why do you think that might be literal?
In other texts, we have in the Apostle Paul's writing there, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, it talks about a time where he comes, and we see it in 1 Corinthians, where those, and it's the rapture, the Left Behind books, where those who have trusted in Christ, they have followed him, they've been born again, are rise from the grave, right, are taken up their own at life. And so that's a picture of what we would say the rapture, where he comes in the sky. How everyone sees that, I don't know how that works on around Earth, but then you also have the time described in Revelation, especially Revelation 19, the rider on the white horse, where Jesus actually physically touches down, and he brings the armies of heaven, and it's a description of those who were raptured up. He brings back with them to Earth, and so and like you said, you can't just take one Scripture. That's what gets so many people in trouble. And Matthew 24 and 25 are just snippets of what we see throughout all of the Old Testament, throughout the prophets, and then in the book of Revelation as well.
Well, look, this is an excellent point that you're making here, because I can remember as clear as a bell, right, my early catechism. And you clearly can't find perfect navigation here between what's literal and what's symbolic. And I think that's what throws people. I think people come to it and say, look, we're talking about God, and
But if you go back to verse 30 where you talked about seeing him in the sky, I mean, he's talking in very, very literal terms throughout, physical things, earthquakes, war, you see, and it goes on, talks about the actual evidence of the false Messiah. So, the reader then is having to make a decision to say this is symbolic or this is not.
Right.
That's dangerous,
Absolutely. Well, that's what I'm saying. My belief is no God would ever leave anything vague. God speaking to humans would say, this is figurative speech. What I'm about to say will actually happen the way I say it. And then stop talking. Then we're done. No questions. I told you.
And he does in the Old Testament. It says many times in the prophets, it says, "Thus saith the Lord," and then you get the prophecy, and then you get, whether that's was the Babylonian captivity or whether that's the actual return of Israel. And so Scripture itself, especially in the Old Testament, that's, and in the New Testament, it's told, or in the book of Revelation, it's told as if Jesus is there with John in some type of vision, some type of appearance, and he's telling him these things, and he's recording them. So the claim of Scripture is these things will happen. And so, you said, make that statement that it would be figurative. I think the default, because it's how it's been done in history, it seems to be how the first disciples, because we have a time period, I believe around the 400 AD point, where you actually move to allegorizing and spiritualizing things. And so before that, in the early church, as we're reading the church fathers, they were very solid on figurative, literal, understanding.
Well, I mean, Jesus was capable of saying things like, God's love for man is like, and then you hear a parable. He's clear, right? Yeah. So you would wonder why that wouldn't just be uniform throughout it'd be easy to separate symbol from instruction, or I should say,
I wish they had larger pieces of papyrus and. As they wrote these early manuscripts, because maybe they could have wrote more,
Yeah, and it's hard to believe God wouldn't perform a miracle and give them every tool to make sure my word is clear and simple. I wanted to go to the uneducated. I wanted to go to the illiterate. I don't want to have a wise man explain my word, because I speak to all. That's what I think, a lot of people were looking for, that kind of clarity. Let me, I got to watch our time here. I'm having such a good time with you. I could keep you on for hours. Will you come back on the show? Because time is tight.
I would love to.
All right, I got one more biggie for you, okay? And then, and actually, we can do two things at the same time. Why don't you walk us through prophecysimplified.com, because I have a question about something on the website right now, but why don't you describe what features and how people can reach out to you directly on that website?
We're really in the early stages of this ministry. We're open doors. We're speaking quite a bit, and so you'll find there on the homepage what we're about. It's also under the More Info button. You can find a video that actually tells the vision behind this ministry, and under the we regularly blog on this. You can find where we're at locally at our events, and you can contact us through the contact page.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I do see it's pretty easy on your website to invite you to a worship service, to an event. What do you do, and who do you work with? And tell us how much you love that. That must be so much fun.
It has been awesome to travel around and just see what is happening around the country, and then just have the one-on-one conversations, because my goal is every time I speak, it's not just to, I don't want to impress, I don't want to give a great speech. I want to make sure the audience clearly understands what's said in the Scriptures. And so I have conversations constantly, and I'm meeting with pastors and seeing what they're teaching, and just trying to boil it down to the most understandable aspect of that. And so, but we're open. Anybody gives me an open door, I am there. We are a nonprofit ministry. It's overseen by a board of directors, and I am affiliated. I was as a Baptist pastor, so I'm affiliated with Baptist, but I'll speak any denomination anywhere I can.
Right on. And a spiritual prepper is not somebody who's buying canned food in the middle of the night that's good for 25 years, right? You mean prepare your soul, prepare yourself, right?
Yeah. I spent a day watching the Nat Geo Doomsday Prepper show, where they would focus in on one group, one family that was prepping physically for some type of disaster, some type of doomsday. They'd bring people out to review them and see how they were doing. And I watched like 8 episodes back to back. In every one of them, somebody was preparing from some different end.
Right.
And most of them came to the conclusion for what they were preparing for, but just basically pulling something out of thin air. And so I'm just always screaming at the TV saying, some of you are going to be wrong. And wouldn't it be terrible to spend your whole life
right.
preparing for something and to get it wrong?
Oh.
But then even if you got it right,
yeah,
then you've invested your whole life just to tack on a few more years. While, scripturally we're talking about eternity, we're talking about, no end to the afterlife. And so that should be where we prepare.
Jake, you are religious rock and roll, my friend. Thank you very much for this chat today. Now, I want people to know.
I enjoyed it.
Oh, you can. We're going to have you back for sure. The book comes out in April. It is called Spiritual Prepper. And you just heard how the book came into being. Tapping into overlooked prophecies to prepare you for doomsday. Jake McCandless on the Ed Tyll Show. Go to the website, www.prophecysimplified.com, and then keep your eye on the website, wndbooks.com, and watch in April for the release of the book.
You can actually pre-order now on the page. So
right on.
Everybody needs to just pre-order, and they'll have it in the mail. I think through WMD you'll get it first before any other place.
Dude, you rock. Thank you for today. I look forward to having you back on the show real soon. Thank you.
Sounds great.
You got
Thank
it.
you.
Jake McCandless, love this. These, we're doing a pretty good job since the first of the year on the show. Because we were dominated last year by the political, right? I mean, you couldn't get away from it, the election cycle. But some of the things that we're covering today, our terrific guest earlier on angels, our awesome guest in this segment, the spiritual prepper, these are the questions I prefer to spend time on. I'm sick and tired of being a Pavlov's dog. You got this, you got that, you got this. Could we think? And could we think deeply? Because if there's one thing the internet and the mobile devices and the high-speed broadband and Netflix don't do, and if there's one thing the internet really sucks at, it's serious, deep thinking. We love it. For us, it's like a day at the beach on the Ed Tyll Show, Starcom Radio Network. Work. 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 Work.